So I've got to come around here so I can see everybody. All right, so I've got a picture up there. Who knows what that is? Just tell me. Shout it out. Mousetrap. Okay, tougher question. How many parts does it take to make a mousetrap? You can count them. How many different parts are there? What do you think? How many? 4? More than that? 6? Less than 7? 5. I heard you say 5. There's 5 parts. I think some of you forgot. There's this part right here that kind of snaps and grabs the mouse, right? What makes it snap? There's a spring that makes it snap forward. You put the cheese right here on the little platform, and this holds the hammer back like that. So you hold the hammer back, and you hold it like that, and it snaps and catches the mouse. But it's got to have a platform. No, that's enough. You have to have a platform. So it has to have 5 parts. Would it work if it didn't have a spring? Would it work if it didn't have this hammer thing? Would it work if you couldn't hold the hammer back with this little latch? You have to have all 5 parts. If even one part is missing, it will not work. Remember the way I showed you yesterday? There's a little electric motor inside of a little bacteria that's so small you need a microscope to see it. 10,000 of them would fit on a grain of sand. And they're made of about 40 different parts. Now, I like to do experiments. I'm a scientist, and I do experiments to figure out, is something possible or isn't it possible? Could things make themselves, or do they have to have like God or people to make them? So I have what I call the magic can of evolution. Evolution's a word that means everything made itself. You don't need God. If evolution made us, God didn't make us because you don't need him. Well, I thought, I'm going to take everything out of my can, and it turns out I have a pin in my can. Okay. Now, just like the mousetrap, guess what? The pin has a lot of parts. And you guys can help me count, okay? I'm going to put the parts back in the can. Whoop. All right, so there's the tip. How many is that? There's a spring, just like the mousetrap had a spring, so it'll go click, click, click when you push it. There's the ink cartridge, so you can write with it. And then, if you unscrew it, there's the little tube that holds it all together. There's this little thing inside that makes it go click, click, click. And then there's a clip that goes on your pocket. 6 parts. Only has 6 parts. And I have all the parts. Now you think if you went to the moon on a spaceship, you would find one of these parts laying there on the moon. How about if you went to Mars? Would you find one of the parts? How about if you were just walking along a beach and no one had ever been on this beach? Do you think you would find like a little spring if no one had been there? You see, the parts of a pin are designed by somebody intelligent to become a pin. That's the same with the parts of our bodies and the parts of animals and the parts of everything that's alive. The parts were even made to become alive. So if I have all of the parts, I got all the parts I need for a pin, how about if I add energy? I'm adding a lot of energy. Do you think it's going to become a pin? How about if I spin it just right so the parts come together? If I just twist it, do you think the pin will come back together? Well, I'm adding energy. How about if I kick it? Whoa! Oh, bummer, you saw it. It never comes apart. So, anyway, but the parts are there. So what I try to show people, maybe I need a lot of energy, like a bomb or a firecracker. So, here we go. I'm going to add a whole bunch of energy. Ready? Here we go. Boom! So, maybe if we had a whole bunch of energy, you guys already saw the secret. Maybe then it'll form a pin. What do you think? There were 2 pins. When it fell on the floor, you saw it. I had another pin hidden in there. But you still laughed, didn't you? When I pulled out a pin because of an explosion, you know that couldn't happen. Well, if you hadn't seen it, you'd have been surprised. You would have laughed. You would have thought, that's silly that an explosion could form a pin. When you guys hear, and when you read, and when you watch movies, and you hear them saying, evolution did this, or evolution did that, or you hear about millions of years ago something happened, they're only saying that because they're not believing that God made things. God made life. Even if we have all the parts of the pin, you could never get it to become a little machine. And our bodies are like really, really, really complex machines. So we'll look. There's a fancy word that says irreducibly complex. That means there's so many parts they could never make themselves. I'm going to jump past this. Let me just jump past it. And I'm going to jump past this. And I'm going to talk about another animal. We had fun looking at these animals God had made yesterday. So I'm going to look at a few more of them. And by the way, these are in the book you're going to get next week. This one is on a page in November 2nd. And it's about people that were really smart scientists at Harvard University. They decided to study how smart are bees. How quick can bees learn? Now, is a bee a big animal or is it a little animal? Little tiny animal, right? And guess what? It's got an itsy-bitsy, teeny-weeny little brain, about the size of a grain of sand. Teeny little brain. So they thought, well, bees can't be that intelligent. Let's see if they can learn. So this is what they did. There's a bee. They took a whole bunch of bees with beehives. See all the bees in the air? And they decided, we're going to move their food like about 100 feet away, and we're going to time them with a stopwatch and see how long does it take all the bees in the hive to find the food, like a really sweet source of food. So that's what they did, and it only took them about 5 minutes. They opened up the hive, and the bees came out, and a bee found it, and he came back to the hive, and this is what the bee does. The bee comes back to the hive, and he wiggles his butt, and he does a little dance. And the other bees are watching him do his little wiggle butt dance, okay? And he wiggles. Oh, you know, my laser pointer isn't working. But he wiggles in a certain line, back and forth, lined up with the direction of the sun. And it tells all the other bees what direction they have to fly to find their food. And then he goes around and around in a circle a certain number of times, and that tells them how far away the food is. So all the other bees watch him, and they know what direction to fly, and they know how far to fly, and then they all fly out of the hive to find the food. Pretty smart, huh? How did he learn how to do that? God told him. Because think about it, if some bee came back to the hive and he just started wiggling his butt, how would the other bees know what it meant? They would have no idea unless God put it into their brains exactly what it means. See, God does these things so we'll be amazed at the animals he's made. So then the researchers moved the food 200 feet away. How long do you think it took the bees to find the food that time? About 10 minutes, you're right. Then they moved the food 300 feet away. So it's really far away now. It still only took them, about another 5 minutes. No, it only took them about 10 minutes again, and they found the food. So then they moved the food 400 feet away. Nope. You know what happened? You want to know what happened? Okay, when you quit guessing, I'll tell you what happened. This is what happened. While those really, really smart scientists were studying the bees to see how smart they were, the bees were studying the scientists. The bees, they saw that they'd moved it 100 feet in that direction, and then they moved it another 100, then they moved it another 100, and the bees thought, I know where the food's going to be the next time. They were already waiting for them to show up with the food before they even put it there. The bees had flown to the next spot and were all buzzing around waiting for them to show up with the food. They outsmarted the scientists with their little teeny brain. They were smarter than the people studying them. See, God is amazing. He even makes little tiny bees really, really smart. And we find this out when we study them. Want to hear about another animal? Oh, this is my favorite. He is so cool. The bobtail squid. October 3rd in your book, you'll get to read about the bobtail squid. This guy likes to become invisible. Yeah, sort of invisible. You see, he swims around in the ocean up near the top, where the top of the ocean's at. But all the other fish, the big fish, they like to eat these squids. And he only comes out at night. And if they look up and they're like the moon is in the sky, they'll see his shadow by the moonlight and they'll go up and they'll eat him. But he doesn't want to be eaten. So what's he going to do to disguise himself? He's going to camouflage himself. But it's really cool how he does it. See, anybody know what a firefly does? What's it do? It lights up. It's got a little bright light in its tail. It's called luminescence, photoluminescence. It glows. It makes light. Well, there are bacteria, little microscopic animals that do the same thing in the ocean. They can make light just like a firefly. Well, this squid has a special little sac underneath of it, and it grabs some of these glowing bacteria, and it eats them, and then it goes down into its belly. And when it swims up high in the ocean, it uncovers the bacteria, so its whole stomach glows, and it looks like the moon. So when the fish trying to eat it look up, they see this glowing white spot, and they think it's the moon, when it's really the squid. Now, this is the neat part. When there's a half moon, it turns off half of the bacteria. When a cloud covers the moon, it covers all of the bacteria. When the moon comes back out, it turns the bacteria back on. It knows exactly how much light to put out in order to exactly match the amount of moonlight above it. And in the morning, it dumps all the bacteria out of its stomach, and it leaves just enough so they regrow, and the next night it can have the right amount of light and the right amount of camouflage. Isn't that cool? How does it know to do that? God made it, knowing how to look exactly like the amount of moonlight, how to eat the bacteria, how to use the bacteria, how to store the bacteria. All those parts had to be there all at once. Oh, here's my favorite. What's that? It's a big lizard called an iguana. This guy lives along the ocean. He's about this big, okay? He's a big lizard. But he has to get fish to eat and seaweed. So he has to swim out away from the island to get his food. Well, his island is surrounded by, guess what? Sharks. And guess what sharks like to eat? Iguanas. They're like chocolate cake. They're his favorite food. The iguana swims really quiet so that it can't hear it swimming. But sharks can't see very good, but they have really, really good hearing. They can't hear it swimming, but they could hear its heartbeat. Bum, 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 bum. So you know what he does? How could you make your heart stop? What would happen if you made your heart stop beating? You would die, wouldn't you? What's your name? You guessed it. What is it? Kaling just guessed it. This guy makes his heart stop so he won't get eaten by the sharks. He just shuts down his heart, then he goes swimming. And his heart doesn't beat for 45 minutes. He's out there swimming around, eating the grass, catching other little fish to eat, having a good time. And then when he's all done eating, he climbs back up on the shore and he restarts his heart. Isn't that cool? As far as we know, this is the only animal that knows how to do this. How did he learn how to do that? God does these things, so we will be amazed at who he is. He's an amazing God that can make amazing animals to do amazing things. There he is swimming around without his heart beating. Okay, last little example. And this is a guy called a leafhopper, and he's like a grasshopper, but way, way faster. He jumps really, really fast. And there's lots and lots of different colors and shapes and sizes that God made. But his little legs are really long, and they're made to jump. He jumps so fast, he's like a bullet coming out of a gun. But when he's wee little, when he's a baby, he doesn't weigh much. So he moves 100 times faster than you could throw a ball at somebody. Really, really fast. He almost disappears. Well, scientists wanted to try to figure out, how does he jump this fast? Want me to show you how fast that is? Well, astronauts, when they go zooming up into space in a rocket, they have to move really, really fast. And when we move really, really fast, the blood drains out of our face, and we might like faint or black out. So they have to test the people that become jet pilots and astronauts to see. So they put them in a machine that spins them around, round and around and around, faster and faster, to see if they're gonna faint. Let me show you what 10 times faster than gravity. Like when I drop something, for instance, if I drop this ball, that's 1 times as fast as gravity will pull something. The people in that centrifuge, they're moving that fast, really, really fast, 10 times faster than the ball would drop. This is what it looks like when you go 10 times faster than gravity. You think they're moving really fast? They're moving so fast, their faces are being pushed backwards. That's how fast they're moving. Our little insect, when he jumps, he moves 100 times faster than I just threw that ball, like a bullet. Now here's the problem. Scientists were trying to figure this out again. The little insect's walking through the forest, and he's like singing a song. Dum-de-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. And his brain says jump. In order to do something, your brain has to tell you to do it. So his brain says jump. Well, that little message has to go down his back, and it has to go to both his legs. It has to tell his right leg to move, and it has to tell his left leg to move. Well, the legs move so fast that when the message goes to both legs, it's going to reach one of those legs a little quicker than the other. So one of his legs is going to push sooner than the other leg's going to push. Do you think he's going to go in a straight line if you push with one leg first? No, which way are you going to go? How about you guys? Do you think you're going to go in a straight line? You're going to push sideways, aren't you? That's what's going to happen. But he's moving like a bullet, and he's probably going to hit a tree. He's not going to go the direction he wants to go, and his brains are going to get like smashed when he hits the tree. So he's going to die. So the scientist had to figure out, how does he move in a straight line? How does he get both legs to move at the same time? So they looked inside of him with microscopes, and they magnified what was deep down inside of him, and that's what they found. Now, does that look like something that made itself? There's gears. Those are called gears. See, there's little fingers that stick inside of the other fingers, and one of those gears is attached to the left hand, and one of the gears is attached to the right hand leg. So when one of those legs start to move, the gears make both legs move at the same time. Isn't that cool? That's inside of a little insect, because God made it that way. It's, again, God showing us the kind of things that he wants us to see. Last little example. This is a bird that can fly farther than any other bird in the whole world. He flies all the way from Alaska, all the way down past Australia to a country called New Zealand. It's 7,000 miles. That's like all the way from here, all the way across America to the other side, to New York City, and then all the way back to Seattle again, and then all the way to New York City again, and then all the way back to Seattle again without ever stopping. It is really, really, really far, and it's all over the ocean. He can't stop, because if he stops, he'll land in the ocean, and he'll just die. There's no place to eat, there's nothing to do, he'll just end up drowning. He's got to fly all the way there. So this is what he does. Before he leaves, he starts eating. He has to fly continuously for a whole week, night and day and never sleep, just keep flying. So he just eats until he looks really, really fat, like a penguin. How well do penguins fly? Not very good. They're kind of fat and they don't have good wings. Well, this guy gets really, really fat because he's got to store up lots and lots of food for his flight. Well, he's not going to fly very good with these fat, so he makes a special kind of fat, and then he shrivels up everything inside of his body. His stomach, his liver, his kidneys, his everything, all the things that are inside of his body, they all kind of shrivel up teensy weensy weensy. And that makes room for all the fat, so he's not really big. Then he can fly all the way there without dying. But all that has to be there the way God made it, or it never would have worked. See, all the parts, just like the mousetrap, just like the pin, they all have to be there when he was created, or he wouldn't be able to live. Now we're going to talk about something else for our last 15 minutes. We're going to talk about fossils. So that's just some examples of the animals God have made, but we find all sorts of dead animals in the ground. I'm going to start over here. This is an animal that used to be alive. It's a real animal. He used to crawl around in the ocean. He's called a trilobite. But they found him in a rock. He's dead. He doesn't tell us how he got in the rock. You want to touch him? Is he hard or is he soft? He's really hard, isn't he? That's because his body, because he was buried in rocks, you just kind of pass it back and then send it over to the other side. Every part of his body, every cell was turned into rock. That's what a fossil is. And we find dinosaurs all over the place. Their bones have been turned into solid rock. Now, every country of the world, and I'm going to back up so you can kind of see them, all these different countries in the world, ancient people in Persia, they talk about that in the Bible, or Scandinavia, or the Fiji Islands out in the Pacific, or Egypt, or Alaska, or South America, the Egyptians, the Africans, all of these countries in the world, the people have a story that there's been a flood on the earth. All of them. Not just the Bible, but all the people in all the countries of the world, they remember that there's been a flood on this planet because the whole world was covered by water in the past. And the Bible tells us about that in the very first chapters of Genesis. Chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9 talk about the worldwide flood. And these people who came from Noah and the ark and spread out to create all these cultures, they remember this flood. That's why they all have stories about it. And the Bible said the fountains of the great deep, the whole earth cracked open and water came shooting out that covered up all of the land and killed all the animals and all the plants. It's a real thing that really happened in history. Now, I want to show you a little, let me see if this works, a picture of what kind of things happened during a flood. Okay, I've got to go find that little movie, just a second, of what a flood can do. Because I want you to understand how powerful this flood of Noah was. So it's in this file. Okay, right here. You have to turn the sound down a little on this one. Okay, so here is flood. In Japan in 2012, there was a big tsunami, a tidal wave that washed into the land, and it came up this river from the ocean, and it overflowed onto the street in this town. You see the water's coming, it's carrying cars, and do we have any sound at all? Should be a little bit of sound. You can hear the rushing water if there's some sound. So now the water's coming. Okay, turn it down. Just a little bit of background sound. So you can hear the rushing water. Now the water's flowing across the road. It's bringing cars and slamming them into the buildings. It's about 5 foot deep on the road now. And it's starting to flow into this little village. Okay, now I'm going to pause it. Okay, I want you to just look at this little town. There's maybe 1,000 little houses, wood structures, concrete buildings, and the water's starting to come into this town. The hill behind it's maybe 50 foot tall. The river's over here. Here's a factory. And the water's starting to flood into the town from the river. Now, this is a flood that happened about 6 years ago in Japan. So the person's standing on a building that's about 10 stories high. And the water's flowing into the town. Now, as the camera comes back around, you'll see, now see the water's even deeper. It just picked up this whole warehouse. That's like weighs 1 million pounds, and the water just picked it up. Now the water's going to carry that building. It's full of great big boxes full of various things. They weigh about 1,000 pounds each. And the moving water just crushed that building. It's just water that's just flowing down the river, and it just smashed that building. And all of those boxes are coming out. If the water gets a little higher, that building will just be turned into rubble. It'll just be completely demolished. Now watch what happens. He's going to show what the town looks like. Every house, every building, the factory's gone. That warehouse is picked up. The water's only about 10 feet deep, and it is totally destroying this town. Just from 10 feet. The water's not even as deep as the ceiling in this building. And it's completely pulverizing the whole town. Just because of that water flowing through there. Nothing is surviving. If the water gets us up above these buildings, then even that building would be reduced to just rubble. It's just flowing in and destroying everything. Now, imagine what God tells us about Noah's flood. Let's see, I'm going to turn it and I'm going to read just a section, what God, just a little, just 1 or 2 verses about what God says happened during Noah's flood. Okay, got to back up. This is Genesis chapter 7. It says, verse 19 says, the waters of the flood prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, the whole earth, and all of the high hills that were under the entire heaven were covered. Every mountain, every hill, everything on earth was covered by water, is what God's telling us. 15 cubits, that's about 25 feet upward, the waters prevailed, and even the mountains were covered. See, everything on earth was covered with water. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth. All of the birds, the cattle, all of the beasts, every creeping thing that creeped upon the earth, and every man, except for Noah and his family, died on the whole earth. Everything in whose nose was the breath of life, everything that was on dry land died. Everything on the planet died. Every living substance, that's every plant, every tree, every vegetable, everything was ripped up on the entire earth. Every living substance was destroyed upon the face of the ground. Men and cattle and creeping things and birds of the air, they were destroyed from the earth. And only Noah remained alive and those with him on the ark. And this flood, the waters stayed on the earth for 150 days. You know, that's 7 months. For 7 months, the water stayed upon the earth. Okay, so that's the flood. So what you saw was a teeny little itsy bitsy flood with only about 20 foot of water. There's enough water in the oceans of the world that if you just kind of pushed down on the mountains and pushed up on the ocean bottoms, there would be 8,000 feet, a whole mile of water on top of everything on the whole planet. That's how much water is on Earth. That's what caused all the fossils. That's what created all the dead animals in the planet. Okay, I'm going to do questions when we're all done. So let me just go back and we'll talk a little bit more about fossils and dinosaurs either today or tomorrow. We'll get to that, but let's see what comes next. So we'll talk about dinosaurs. I've been to Colorado and I've helped dig up dinosaurs. Here's a whole bunch of people that are looking in all these rock layers to try to find dinosaur bones. The dinosaur bones are in those rocks because those rocks formed underwater during Noah's flood. only about 5,000 years ago. When you hear about millions of years, that's just a story to try to explain the rocks, but they leave out the flood. The flood's what made the rocks. And we find all sorts of dinosaurs, apatosauruses, triceratops, critters like this. You know who he is. T-Rex. Find all sorts of bones in the ground. And this is what the bones look like. This is one dinosaur bone that I helped dig out of the ground. And you just kind of chip away at the rock until you find the bone. Then you put preservative on it. You cover it with plaster so it doesn't fall apart, and you dig it out of the rocks. To make a fossil, turn something into rock like the fossil I'm talking around, you can't just have something die and lay there. You know, when something dies, it doesn't turn into a fossil. When a tree falls, it turns back into soil. When a fish dies, it gets eaten up, and even its bones disappear. To make a fossil, you've got to bury it really deep. Imagine 1,000 foot of water filled with dirt and sand and rocks and boulders, and it's sweeping across the land, destroying everything, killing the animals, and then when it slows down, all that stuff settles out, and it buries everything really deep. And that's how you form fossils. See, our dinosaurs, they were on the land, and big waves of water filled with all sorts of dirt and sand came washing across the land, and then they got buried. And then layer after layer of rock formed, and then their bodies, their skin and their hair just kind of rot away, but the bones, they last longer, and the bones end up turning to rock, and then we find them. Now, people who don't believe the Bible, they don't think there's ever been a flood, so they have to explain these rock layers some other way. So they say, well, a fish dies, and slowly over millions of years it gets covered with dirt, and eventually it rots away, and what gets left are the bones, and they turn into fossils really slowly over huge periods of time. But that's not what happens. When a fish dies, other fish come and eat it, it falls apart, and even the bones disappear and get eaten. They don't turn into fossils. So something different happened in the past, and God's told us what? There was a flood that buried everything. Now here's a certain kind of fossil that's really, really common, and it's part of a dinosaur. We find thousands, hundreds of thousands of this kind of fossil. We find so many of them, they gave it a special name. They call it coprolite. And you can go to college, and you can study fossils, and you can specialize in studying just this kind of fossil. I forgot to bring, I had some pieces I usually pass around. I forgot to bring them. But they're so common, I went on to eBay. It's on the internet where you can buy things, and I typed in coprolite, and I came up with almost 1,000 people selling little pieces of coprolite, this kind of fossil. Anybody guess what that is? Oh, you were here the other night when I talked about it. Yeah, that's the poop from a dinosaur. Now, it's turned to solid rock. It's a fossil. Now, let me ask you this. Anybody who has cats or dogs, when they poop, does their poop turn into a fossil? No, it never happens. If you leave it outside, it just turns back into dust. It never turns into a fossil. So how come there's all this fossilized stuff that came from dinosaurs? Because it got buried really deep during Noah's flood. Here's another interesting fossil. See these little ridges? That's dinosaur skin. It got buried so fast and so deep that even its skin, the impressions of what it looked like, got turned into a fossil. Here's a fossil fish eating another fish. Whoops. See right there, it's eating that fish. Now, if fossils formed really slow over millions of years, it would take hundreds of years to eat a meal, to get it to form enough sediment to capture that fish. Does it take you hundreds of years to eat your breakfast? No. It's really fast. So to catch that fish eating another fish, it had to have been buried really fast and really deep. That's what happened during Noah's flood. And we find these in rock layers all over the world. So all over the world, the rock layers form fast. This is a dinosaur that lives in the ocean giving birth to a baby. See, if that forms slowly over hundreds and thousands of years, it doesn't take long to have a baby. It happens really fast. So that had to have been buried really fast. And then I wanted to show you, they found a Tyrannosaurus rex bone, and it had all this soft stuff inside of it. If you have a sandwich and you leave it out someplace outside on a hot summer day, and you come back a month later, is your sandwich still going to be kind of soft and squishy? Hard. It's going to be hard as a rock. Well, the same thing's true if you bury something in the ground. All of its, everything, every part of it, its blood vessels, its skin, everything's going to become really, really hard. It's either going to disappear or it's going to turn into a rock. Well, inside of this dinosaur bone, about 10 years ago, they found soft, stretchy tissue, soft stuff that hadn't turned hard. Blood vessels, blood cells, they were still there. And it's because they aren't really old. We also find drawings in caves, like in the Grand Canyon, in Utah, in Australia, in Africa. They find bones that aren't fossilized from dinosaurs. They find fresh tissue and carbon-14 and DNA inside of dinosaur bones. They find drawings of things that look exactly like dinosaurs. And yet, in the dinosaur books and in movies, we're told dinosaurs died 60 million years ago. Well, if they died 60 million years ago, how could people draw pictures of them? Because they've seen them. Noah was told to take 2 of every kind of animal in the ark. The bones of dinosaurs are buried in the ground because of Noah's flood, but people who lived after the flood, they drew pictures of dinosaurs. For instance, here was a book written about 1,800 years ago, almost a little bit after the time where Jesus was alive. And someone in one of their books said, the history of this area says there are dragons that are 10 paces. That's about 30 feet long. This is an animal 30 feet long, they called a dragon. Now, an elephant is only about 15 feet long or 20 feet long. They're not that big. The only animal that lives on land that could be that big would have been a dinosaur, and it's called it a dragon. In the Bible, in the book of Job, let me turn to that section, and I want to read to you something out of the Bible that talks about an animal that God made. Okay, just a second. Okay, Job 40. Okay, this is describing an animal that Job has seen that God is talking about. It says, this animal, he's the greatest of all the animals God has made. He has strength in his stomach and force in his belly. He moves his tail like a huge tree. A cedar tree is a tree that's 50 feet tall. Huge tail. His bones are tied together strongly. They're strong as iron and bronze and brass. He's chief in the ways of God. Surely the mountains will bring him forth. He towers above us, and he drinks up river and eats things along the river of the Jordan. So it's a creature that's so big, he's taller than man. He eats plants, and he has a tail bigger than like an enormous tree. So here's their animal. Just a second. Hang on. Okay, just a second. Okay, so here's our huge tail, okay? Let's try to figure out what kind of animal this is that's being described in the Bible. Whoops, hang on. Could it be an elephant? No. Does that make sense? No. Could it be a hippopotamus? You know, in a lot of Bibles, you look and they have notes in the bottom, it says, this is talking about an elephant or a hippopotamus. Well, it couldn't be, because those animals don't have a big tail. How about that? Does that work? That's what we think these big apatosauruses looked like. Huge tails, like a huge tree. That's what you would compare it with. You see, the people living thousands of years ago, they think Job was written probably within 500 years or so of Noah's flood. Noah would have brought dinosaurs on the ark. People would have known about them. They would have described them. They would have drawn pictures of them, but they didn't call them dinosaurs because the word dinosaur hadn't been invented yet. Nobody used that word until about 150 years ago. But dragons were talked about for thousands of years throughout history. All the different cultures talked about dragons. That's just a word that meant dinosaur. Here are stones that were buried in Peru that show an animal. What's that look like? How could they have drawn that if they hadn't seen a dinosaur? Here was one that was dug out of ground. It shows someone riding on top of something. And it has these little circular things, little circular skin structures. Here's one that looks like a triceratops. Here's a wooden carving that looks like one. Here's a cave drawing that looks like a plesiosaur. Here's a carpet covering a plaque in England, and there's something that looks just like a dinosaur with its neck wrapped around another dinosaur. Why? Because people had seen these things. This is a temple in Cambodia where they've got all sorts of birds and monkeys and squirrels and deer, all sorts of animals, and the only one that people don't think is a real animal is that one. What looks just like a dinosaur. That's why they don't think it's a real animal. The Chinese have they've got an astronomical chart that has 12 different symbols. They call it the year of the snake, the year of the dog, the year of the rat, the year of the rooster. And then the only other one that's every single one of them is an animal that they know about. They've got the year of the dragon, because it really was a real animal they'd seen too. It was a dinosaur. See, Noah brought dinosaurs on the ark. They're extinct now because people like to kill big, dangerous animals. We almost killed all the elephants. We've almost killed all the tigers over in India. And I think thousands of years ago, we ended up killing the last of the dinosaurs, and they were called dragons. Now, I'm going to save this last thing for tomorrow, but that's where fossils and dinosaurs, when you hear about those things, that's where they fit into the Bible. They're there because of the flood of Noah, not because there's been millions of years of Earth history. Okay, that's all I wanted to talk about this morning. How much time do we have? I've got some questions. A couple questions. Okay, we'll start in the very back this time. Get the mic. You got a microphone? Okay. Well, no, I right back here I picked one. So let's, at the very back, yep. Okay, in case everybody didn't hear, he said, could the dinosaurs have died because there just wasn't enough food after the ark landed? Okay, that's a good question. I think many animals might have went extinct because lots of plants were growing. The ark landed after 150 days. That's, by the way, I was wrong. That's not 7 months. That's 5 months. 5 months. But he didn't get off of the ark for a whole year. So he sat there for 7 months with the animals before he let them loose. That's so lots of plants could grow, and even little trees could start growing, and there was lots of things to eat outside of the ark. And everything ate plants at the beginning. This, by the way, is a Tyrannosaurus rex tooth. That's how big its front tooth was. It's a big animal, isn't it? This is the root, and that's the tooth. But even bears have great big teeth. Bats have great big teeth. Just because you have a big sharp tooth doesn't mean you eat meat and other animals. So they could have eaten plants after they were let off of the ark. And because the Chinese talk about dinosaurs, the Egyptians talk about dinosaurs, Africans talk about dinosaurs, Australians, North America, the Indians talk about dinosaurs, I think it took hundreds and maybe thousands of years before all of them were dead. So some of them might have died because they didn't have enough to eat, but we find pictures of them everywhere. So I think many of them survived for many, many years afterwards. Okay? Okay. Okay. Nice and loud.
So is there any dinosaurs left?
I don't think so. There are people hunting for live dinosaurs in some jungles that are like really, really huge, deep jungles in Papua New Guinea, in the Congo, in Africa. There are natives that say, we know about things that sound exactly like dinosaurs. In the Congo, they call them mumbo bumba. and they make roaring sounds, and they say they live way deep in the jungle. And we haven't explored every place on the planet. So it's possible there may still be some dinosaurs left. The Loch Ness Monster, there's lots of people that say they've seen it. That may be a plesiosaur. In Papua New Guinea, they swear they have seen things that look like pterodactyls. So it is possible there's still some dinosaurs that haven't yet went extinct, but it's never been proven. Most people think they have went extinct by now. So, okay? Well, what weapons would they have killed the dinosaur with? You know, ancient people that lived right after Noah's Ark, and they were developing different civilizations, they were very, very smart people. Now, they had lost everything. Imagine if a flood wiped out everything in America. All the cars, all the computers, all the buildings, all of everything. We'd have to just try to struggle to survive. So they would have had big, huge spears. They would have hunted in groups. They would have built cities that had walls, but they would have slowly killed and trapped and had bows and arrows and spears, and they would have killed dinosaurs. We know they killed things like great big mastodons. You know, mastodon's like a huge elephant. I mean, it is big. It towers above you and has these great big horns. And man, back early after Noah's flood, were able to kill those kind of big animals. They killed things like saber-toothed tigers. They went extinct. There were tigers that had great big teeth as big as this. And they were really, really tall. And yet people were very smart, and they were able to hide and make traps and kill these kind of animals. So they would have used the same sort of tools to kill dinosaurs. And as they became more and more people with more and more technology, they would want to get rid of those animals that were a threat to them. So that's kind of what they would have done. Okay, one more question. Two more questions. Why don't you get one from the front? Okay, get one of these guys. Good. Okay, I'll come over here. Yeah. That's a good question. And then, no, it didn't. He didn't like film his building, but his building was like 10 stories high, 10 different floors. And the water only reached maybe 2 stories high. If the water would have went all the way up above his building would have collapsed and been just turned into rubble and dust and dirt. But it never got that deep. The water only got about maybe half as high as the ceiling is in this room. That's all the higher the water was. And it pulverized all those other buildings. He was on a building that was like 10 times taller than this room. And that's why he was able to film it, and we got the movie back. Okay?
Your name, you're the last one from there. My name is Sarah. About how far do you guys usually find the fossils?
How far or how deep? Well, the ones we find have been exposed. It's like there's been all sorts of erosion here on the earth. The whole earth was covered by water. After 5 months, the water started to go down. That means the ocean started to sink. The fountains and the lava that was pouring up stopped. It's kind of solidified, and then it sort of started to sink. And then the water started to rush off of these new land surfaces. And all that wash of water rushing off pulled with it lots of loose sediment. So animals that were buried, big valleys formed. And now you can see all those layers of rock with a valley that's formed because the water's rushed off of the land. And where we find dinosaur bones is kind of in those cliff faces that's been exposed. The animals were buried by the rocks. A big valley forms where the water drags all this sediment out into the ocean, and then the bones get exposed. And over hundreds and thousands of years, there's rain, and there's other floods, and there's wind, and there's freezing and thawing, and the rock kind of crumbles and disappears, and then it exposes the bones. And actually, those bones are really, really valuable. If you can find an entire dinosaur, all the pieces, it's worth like $1 million to a museum. A museum would pay you $1 million for it. So ranchers in Wyoming and Montana When they're riding around on their horses, if they see like something sticking out of the ground and it looks like a bone, and they'll check it out and it turns out to be a big bone, they'll bring in people from a university and they'll spend like a whole year. A whole team of people will spend a whole year just digging out one dinosaur. And then they'll put it all back together and it'll be used in a museum somewhere, and they'll pay the rancher. And he'll make tens and thousands of dollars just to let people dig a dinosaur out of his ground. So that's how they find them, because they're not like way, way, way down deep. So. All right, thank you. Yeah. Yep, very good.
We're going to close in prayer. Now, these guys will be here tonight at 7 o'clock in our service here. If you're interested in coming and talk to your parents, they'll be here showing videos and more pictures at 7 o'clock tonight here. All right? So let's pray, and thank you for listening so good. And maybe thank the speakers on the way out, okay? And
Okay.
Could they touch this?
Absolutely, yeah, they can touch this.
Tell them what that is, brother.
This is an exact replica of a Tyrannosaurus Rex tooth. So yeah, so you touch the trilobite. You can touch this on the way out. On the way out.
All right, let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for today, and thank you for these words. Thank you, Lord, for your wonderful creation. It shows how wise you are, and that we can always remember and reflect our worship towards you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we'll let first and second graders go first.
Okay.